before we talk about hydrogen, we are going to hear from Zaina Urani, who's a student voice from the UniMed network, who might say that climate change is our fault. Zaina, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be on the stage today. I think we have to identify how important the role of the youth is when it comes to green energy and the green energy transition that we have today. In fact, my generation is the generation that is most aware when it comes to climate change impact on the future, and is the generation that is most interested when it comes to the energy sector. So that's why I'm here today to represent the voice of the students when we talk about this, because we are highly incentivized when it comes to engagement in the energy sector, and governments and companies can use that to direct our attention towards green hydrogen through providing, for example, scholarships at universities for programs that educate students about green hydrogen, by also providing funding for internships and work experience to give an early entry point for students in their careers towards green energy. And here, when we talk about renewable energy, we have to remember that it can provide over 42 million jobs by 2050. So here we're talking about a technology that we have to consider the future leaders of it. Because when we talk about the youth, we have to talk about how to prepare them to be to ensure the continuity of the milestones that we are hitting when we talk about green hydrogen. I also want to talk about the policy making and how we should integrate the youth when it comes to policy making through conferences like this today, through summits, through dialogues, because we are policy makers. We are the ones who put big companies under huge scrutiny when their policies go against climate change through social media. So imagine how empowering it would be if we support this youth to use their voices in louder and more powerful positions. And lastly, I want to talk about the youth who come from countries with infrastructure and with poor infrastructure and limitations which limit them from being at the frontier of the development of green hydrogen. We are the ones who face at the first hand how it feels to live with energy that is limited, that is unavailable, that is dependent on other countries. So we are the youth who are most determined to reach out, to talk to the global community, to accelerate the development of green hydrogen, to be able to integrate it into our own communities, into our own countries, because we are the ones who see the impact firsthand. We are not only looking at the impact that will happen in 10 years or 20 years with climate change, we are also thinking about an impact that can happen in 2 years or 5 years within our own communities. That's why I think collaborations in this field are very important, and that the youth are for sure the future of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaina. So now? So now we are going to move to the main panel. And so let me welcome Gilles Badot, Director, Adriatic Sea European Investment Bank, Silvio Maicali, Professor at MIT and founder of Algorand, Joe McMonigle, Secretary General, International Energy Forum, and Reem Barab, a Senior Economist at the Policy Center for the New South. So this panel is going to be about hydrogen, in particular green hydrogen. We have only one slide. There you see basically, I think the title of the panel is Hydrogen Our Future, right? And here we are looking how hydrogen might change the geopolitical and market dynamics of the energy systems. Here we have basically grouped countries on the basis of their renewable resources endowments, fresh water availability, because we're talking about green hydrogen. Hydrogen is produced by renewable electricity through water splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and infrastructure potential. Today, there are no infrastructure for hydrogen deployed at scale. There are only some captive pipelines in the US and in Germany. So we use a proxy, and the proxy that we use, basically the assumption that we make is that countries which in the past have been able to deploy energy infrastructure at scale would be able to do so also in the case of hydrogen. On the basis of this, we divide countries in 5 groups that you can see up there, what we call export champions, countries that have the potential to become key exporter of green hydrogen around the world, importers, water-constrained producer, regional exporter or self-sufficient producer, and infrastructure-constrained producers. So today, we will have different, with my colleagues, we will give you the different views of how hydrogen could be adopted and deployed at scale. And I would like to start with Joe and ask what role does IEF see for hydrogen in the transition?
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be back again in Rome. I was here last year for the hybrid version of the Med Dialogues, but it's great to be back for the in-person version of it. Unlike my colleagues here, I'm not really a hydrogen expert, although, of course, being a Secretary General of an international energy organization of governments, hydrogen is a key focus of our organization. Hydrogen has an important role in the energy transition and decarbonization. And I think it's important to maybe look at a 30,000-foot view of how hydrogen fits in. The IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, which I used to be the vice chairman of when I worked in the US government, so I have a lot of respect for them. They came out with a technology report in 2020 that essentially said, in order for us to meet our climate goals by 2050, that 50% of those goals can be met with renewables, with wind and solar. The other 50% have to come from new technologies. And this is really where hydrogen fits into the picture. Hydrogen has such a key role to play in terms of, what we like to say is if you can't electrify it, you have to go to hydrogen, because hydrogen is really needed in these hard-to-abate sectors. From a geopolitical standpoint, it's also incredibly important. I mean, look at today's world, the war in Russia and how oil and gas are being used as a political weapon. Theoretically, you could make hydrogen anywhere. There's no, there certainly are places where hydrogen can be made, where there's more plentiful wind and solar resources, but theoretically you can make it anywhere. And so you're not, the dependency factor on fossil fuel producers is really not there. But having said that, the IEF is headquartered in Saudi Arabia, and what you're seeing is countries in that part of the world that are big producers of hydrocarbons, they don't want to be left behind. So they are looking at how do we stay in the energy supplying business. And so, for example, Saudi Arabia is building probably the biggest hydrogen production facility in the world. It's a real project. A lot of the projects, I think, I'll be interested to hear what my colleagues think here, but a lot of the projects are really press release projects. They're announcements about projects. This is a project in Saudi Arabia that is a real project with 3 public companies involved in it that have responsibilities to shareholders and are spending billions and billions of dollars to do it. I think it has a $5 billion price tag. So this is Saudi Arabia wants to be in the business of exporting green hydrogen, and the UAE similarly has similar ambitions. And so, obviously the first movers in hydrogen in the United States, Europe, and China, but we really need other parts of the world, especially where there are these rich wind and solar renewable assets, to get more involved in the hydrogen production game, if you will. So that's kind of how we view it from the International Energy Forum perspective.
Thank you, Joe. Jill, can you share with us what the European Investment Bank is doing about green hydrogen and hydrogen in general?
Preparing this panel, I had a chat with one engineer of the EIB that is specialized in the hydrogen and green hydrogen. And he was saying, hydrogen is often called the Swiss Army knife. It's able to replace all fossil fuel. But he said also that, it's like a Swiss Army knife. When you need to screw something, you take your screwdriver. So in a certain way, hydrogen is seen a bit like the panacea, but you need to take into consideration what is our objective. And our objective is to reduce the CO2 production. And the problem of hydrogen is that hydrogen has a conversion level. It means that it needs energy to be produced, okay? And if you want to produce 1 kilogram of hydrogen, you need more or less 50 kilowatt hour of electricity. To produce this electricity through gas, you would need 18 kilograms of CO2. If you transform methane into gray hydrogen, it's only 8.5 kilograms of CO2. So you see that the equation is not that simple. And green hydrogen needs to be produced with the surplus of renewable energy. Because right now, we are not exceeding a lot the production of energy we need in terms of renewable energy. So the equation is very complex. That's a first difficulty of hydrogen. But clearly, to respond to your question, clearly the EIB is taking the hydrogen as a solution for the green transition, and it is embedded in our energy lending policy, and it's also recognized through REPowerEU by the European Commission. They intend to develop capacity to produce hydrogen for around 10 million tons at the horizon 2030, and to also import potentially part of the hydrogen that is needed. Now let's look at where it would be useful now. First use would be to replace the gray hydrogen if possible, done with superfluous renewable energy. Second is to go towards the hard-to-abate sectors. And I'm thinking about the steel industry or the fertilizer industry where hydrogen is used, but we need to increase the portion of the green hydrogen. Now, also, one of the main issues related to hydrogen is the transportation, because hydrogen is the smallest molecule you can find. So you can use pipelines, but it's very difficult. It has technical issues because you've got lots of leakage. You can liquefy hydrogen, or you can use carriers like ammonia or other type of carriers. But it means that you have to transform hydrogen and transport it into these carriers. This requires some energy, and then you will have to retransform this carrier into hydrogen on the spot, and it requires also energy. So the question could be also, isn't it more economic to transport electricity, green electricity, and to produce on site? So you've got these equations that are difficult. But if we want to prepare the world for tomorrow, we need to work on the production of hydrogen, trying to optimize the way we produce the green hydrogen, but also to try to also transform the energy-intensive industry to the use of hydrogen that would enable to decarbonate when electrification is not possible. So these are the two things on which we are working. I don't know whether you want concrete examples, but let's say that this is more or less the way EIB sees the hydrogen role for the transition.
So you make an important point. I think that it's key to remember that hydrogen is not new. It has been in the industry for the past 150 years, mainly used in refineries for heavy oil upgrading or middle distillates upgrading and in fertilizers. We had a first wave about hydrogen in about 2000, which died for basically two reasons. The first one is that at the time, hydrogen was mainly used for, people were thinking about using hydrogen mainly for mobility application. And there was direct competition with EVs that were much farther along the innovation and deployment cycles. And secondly, renewables were much more expensive than today. So with the renewable prices dropping, intermittency issues, the grid not being able to take all the renewable electricity that is being produced in a decarbonized world, then hydrogen plays a key role as a way to store energy, though, as Jill mentioned, the issue is that you need energy to produce this hydrogen. But then again, the advantage is that once you produce it, you can store it for basically forever, unlike electricity. As you all know, if you leave your mobile phone unused for days, the battery will peter out. So, Rim, we just finished a study, we discussed this the other days, we just finished a study on the future of green hydrogen in the European Union, which shows that Morocco could become, in a regional export scenario where we optimize by cost, could become the main exporter of green hydrogen to the European Union between, let's say by 2050, between 21% if shipping is done by liquefied hydrogen and 41% if it's done by ammonia. So Morocco could change the geopolitics of energy for Europe and in a way replicate the dependencies on energy imports. What is Morocco's strategy on green hydrogen?
Thank you very much. So perhaps I will start by the broader picture and then dive into Morocco. So today, the majority of hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels. However, with growing climate change awareness and increased government's net zero ambitions, the demand for green hydrogen is set to increase exponentially in the future. So, as you said, Morocco saw an opportunity in this to further drive its energy transition forward. So I recall that in 2009, Morocco has adopted the national energy strategy that was very forward-looking and focused on developing renewable energy, particularly in the electricity sector. So in this vein, Morocco has initiated a new process aimed at developing an integrated economic and industrial sector centered around green molecules, namely hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol, to strengthen its transition into sectors that are difficult to decarbonize. So Morocco unveiled its national green hydrogen roadmap back in 2021, and this roadmap is based on 3 strategic areas, which are technology, investment and supply, and demand in market. So basically, Morocco intends to produce green hydrogen through the electrolysis process, which consists of splitting through green electricity, splitting the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. So here we can note that there would be an important need for green electricity and also water. So the element that Morocco needs to focus on in order to produce and exploit green hydrogen are essentially to reduce the costs along the value chain. And for that, research and development and innovation are very important to achieve that in order to know more about the market, the technology, and as well achieve economies of scale that are necessary in order to reduce the costs. Also, ensuring sufficient investment is very important, particularly with building the infrastructure that will be needed for storage and transport. So perhaps here I will focus a little bit on the domestic market for green hydrogen, and then I can expand on other avenues later. So Moroccan-produced green hydrogen is intended to 3 main applications. So first, as an input in industrial processes. Mainly, the roadmap sets an ambition to capitalize on the power-to-X applications to improve the fertilizer industry. So, for instance, the OCP Group, which is Morocco's state-owned enterprise, focusing on producing phosphates and fertilizers, uses a lot of imported ammonia in its processes. And ammonia, being a byproduct of green hydrogen, could be used towards that. So, the objective here is to substitute these imports. The second use, to a much lesser extent, in the transportation sector and residential sector, and also as a storage or flexibility solution for renewable energy. So the green hydrogen being at a crossroad of different sectors, numerous national entities and organizations might be involved at different levels in its market development, which requires strong coordination and strong regulations and institutional framework in order to avoid any bottlenecks that can prevent the implementation of the strategy. Also, we need to keep in mind that the green hydrogen industry is still in its infancy, so there isn't a fully operational market for it yet in Morocco. However, numerous pilot projects have sprung up as a first step of implementing its strategies. And such projects include the Power-to-X projects, which consist of building a 100 megawatt of renewable energy plant to produce green hydrogen through electrolysis. And there is also a small-scale green ammonia production project that is also being developed in partnership with the OCP group. So this is in a nutshell the main elements of Morocco's green hydrogen strategy. And to achieve this potential, though, Morocco needs to be wary of the volatility or the potential variability of the international market, which will require continued assurance of national competitiveness in many areas, such as costs, sustainable transportation, certificates of origins. And I'll end on this point. So we have to keep in mind also that the green hydrogen industry is still facing many technical limitations. So for instance, the cost of producing green hydrogen, particularly through the electrolysis process, is currently remains higher than that of gray hydrogen. And in addition, the hydrogen molecule is very unstable, which raises issues with regards to transportation and storage. And furthermore, for Morocco, it needs to also significantly increase the share of renewable energy in its electricity generation, which stands today at nearly 20%. And there's also the issue of water requirements in the green industry that needs to be taken into consideration. So addressing these limitations will be very critical to the pace of implementation of Morocco's strategy.
Thank you, Rim. So, as you probably have noticed, hydrogen. So, let me put it this way. For me, hydrogen is fascinating because it's really the first time in 150 years that we're actually thinking, and we were talking about this, Andrea, yesterday. We're actually thinking about deploying new energy system at scale. And for someone that has worked all his life in the energy industry, this is a one in a lifetime opportunity. In the past, we've done mistakes when we deployed energy system at scale. It's a long process. Hydrogen will have market dynamics that are very similar to the ones of natural gas, so we'll start as regional markets and then it will grow. We really need to avoid repeating the same inefficiencies that we have encountered in the past and that we're paying for today. So if we think about what is happening today in Europe with the Ukraine war, the fact that our natural gas system were not, a European level, were not developed, taking in consideration the systemic view, but every country developed its own system and then they were sort of interconnected, has created some of the issues that we have today. So now let me move now to Silvio. When, as you probably have noticed, there is a sort of a rainbow of colors of hydrogen. Depending on the chemical process that you use to produce hydrogen, there are different colors. So if you produce hydrogen from coal, it's gray or black hydrogen. If you produce it from renewables, it's green hydrogen. Turquoise hydrogen produced by basically doing an adiabatic reaction where you don't produce a CO2 but carbon, black and hydrogen. And I could go on. Blue hydrogen, if you produce it from gas steam reforming plus a CCUS, the molecule at the end is the same. The main difference, though, is the carbon intensity associated with this molecule. And because today, as Rim and Gilles have said, green hydrogen is much more expensive than gray hydrogen or blue hydrogen. This because we don't factor in the externalities related to the CO2 emission because we don't really have a carbon price at world level. How do we associate to molecules their carbon intensity? How do we make sure that producers of green hydrogen are recognized by the fact that their carbon intensity is zero compared to others? So to give you a number, if you produce hydrogen by coal gasification, you produce 20 tons of hydrogen per each ton of, 20 tons of CO2, carbon dioxide for each ton of hydrogen. If you do it by renewable hydrogen, green hydrogen, it's zero. So Silvio, the question for you, could the blockchain that was developed, has been created as a distributed ledger to manage a big volume of data and track, let's say, commodities along value chains. Could the blockchain help in accelerating the transition to a low carbon economy and in accelerating the adoption of hydrogen?
Okay. Thank you, Nicola. So if you don't mind, perhaps we'll open a quick parenthesis about blockchain. So what is blockchain? It's a common database. Think of it like a ledger, right? That I have, but with a main difference. That I have a copy of a ledger, Joseph has the same copy of a ledger, Gilles has the same copy of a ledger, Rim has the same copy of a ledger, everybody has the same copy of a ledger, each one of you. And in this ledger, every time that there is a new page of transactions added to the ledger, I receive a one page and I know that everybody else will receive the same additional page. I receive page number 10,000,001, I know that the rims will have the same page. This looks like magic because everybody has a copy and I know that wherever you are, the same page number, the same content per page, unbelievable. In fact, the distinction between sophisticated technology and magic is very, very, very thin. All right, now we have this essentially common database, which is very robust because if somebody steals my ledger and puts it on fire, everybody has 1,000,000 copies of a ledger all over the world. That doesn't work. You cannot alter the content of a page of a ledger. Everybody sees the same thing, and everybody has the right to insert a rightful transaction on this ledger. Wonderful. By the way, this is very different from communication. Right now with Facebook, right, a few years back, you push a button and you send your message to millions of people. But when you receive a message from Facebook, do you know that the same message has been received by everybody on the planet? No. So blockchain, this common knowledge, is really a novelty for humanity. Now to your point, this being blockchain, what can we do for green hydrogen? Well, every time there is a plant that is certified to be purely green, the best possible. Some other plant is certified to be greenish, emits a bit more, not as pure as the fig one, or brown, etc., etc. So then tax authorities have a sensor that measures how much, because they want to tax you, how much you are emitting. The same number of, if you want, the same amount of energy, you can track it like in kilowatts, in watts, in joules, anything you want. You put 1 to 1 as a green token if you are a green plan. So let's say RIMS as a green plan has produced 1 billion green token on the blockchain. They are air tokens. At some point, these tokens change hands. I buy 100 tokens from RIM. And at this point, she has 1 billion minus 100, and I'm the proud owner of 100 new tokens. These tokens change hands. And notice one thing, that because you cannot inject new green tokens, because you cannot alter in the blockchain anything, you cannot turn a greenish token into a pure green token, tracking is automatic, right? That automatic, on autopilot, that is unbelievable. So, and then the action of buying something, which is the sum of all green tokens remains the same, they just change hands, is this very costly? No, it's actually very, very cheap. In Algorand, for instance, this is valued a fraction of 1 cent. $0.001. That's pretty cheap. I can afford to buy $10 worth of green hydrogen if I want, because this price point is incredible. And this buying and selling is peer-to-peer. We don't have a mediator to say, I let you transact or I stop transaction. No, is I can transact wherever I want worldwide on a public ledger securely with everybody, incredibly fast, in 3.5 seconds, say, at a fraction of a cent in cost, and everything tracking is for free. That is real magic.
Thank you, Silvio. So, I guess just adding to Silvio's point, which really made me think of, consider that today, to do everything that Silvio said, we use a certificate of origin. It's a very bureaucracy-intense process and manually intensive. And as Silvio said, with blockchain, all this could be done automatically. Joe, let me get back to you. So you mentioned that oil and gas producers are looking into hydrogen. How do you see, let's say, traditional oil and gas producer dealing with the new market and geopolitical dynamics of green hydrogen if adopted at scale?
Well, let me put that to the side for a second and just comment on what Silvio said, because I think what he's doing and blockchain technology is incredibly important for the energy transition, and not just for hydrogen, but I spoke at a carbon credits market conference in Barcelona earlier in the week, and you know, in the voluntary carbon credit market, I mean, some of these credits are actually quite questionable, or there's a lot of double counting of projects that goes on. If you have blockchain technology, there's no way for that to, you can make sure, you can introduce so much integrity and trust into that system. The same could be said for I think, you know, you described, Nicola, the different color codes, and I don't know about anybody in the room, I'm confused already, and I follow this stuff. I think what we need to do, and what the IEF put out in a report earlier this year that was requested by us, by the United States government. We worked in conjunction with the Intercontinental Exchange, ICE, and also with Columbia Energy Center, I'm sorry, Belfer. But anyway, we were basically tasked with how do we accelerate the hydrogen market, and especially what does the early stages look like, and what do we have to do in those early stages? And some of the points you made about not making those mistakes, you know, we have this huge opportunity to ramp up this new infrastructure and technology, and we have to be very careful about how we do it. I think one of the key ingredients to this for creating a very robust, mature market and trade is a standardization of carbon intensity. So doing away with these color code designations and actually coming up with a carbon intensity standard, which, by the way, could be used and should be used everywhere, actually. And this is something that blockchain, I think, would have a very important role in. In terms of energy companies, or traditional producers and energy companies, and this goes to our student voice that we heard at the opening. You know, we're going to need traditional oil and gas companies and producers to ramp up the hydrogen economy. Look at Eni. I think it's a sponsor, I'm not sure. Eni is a sponsor. Eni is a very, sophisticated, great human talent, from a logistics standpoint, has really carried off very complicated projects, traditionally in the hydrocarbon sector, but of course increasingly in the renewable sector. But I guess the point is we have to take the capabilities and the technological and engineering know-how of these companies and these producers that it's being used now in the hydrocarbon sector to really scale up the hydrogen economy. And you know, I read a lot of studies that young people don't want to work for for oil and gas companies anymore, and I get the reason behind it. But we really do need young people to work for oil and gas companies, because we need these companies to ramp up the energy transition and the hydrogen infrastructure. And so that's really what I see as the role for traditional oil and gas now. And by the way, I think we probably should say this as we're in the middle of an energy crisis here in Europe. While we continue the hydrogen economy, the march to a hydrogen economy and the hydrogen technology solution, we have to keep investing in oil and gas, by the way. Because if we don't, we're going to see prices rise as they have now. I think it's a mistake to lay the blame on the war in Ukraine for the current high energy prices. Remember last winter, we already had sky-high natural gas prices. Certainly, the war in Ukraine has added a premium to prices, and obviously energy is being used as a political weapon now. But I think it would be a big mistake to just blame the energy crisis on the war in Ukraine. If the war ended today, we would still be facing a multi-year energy crisis that really we can lay the blame at trying to reduce supply before demand is being reduced simultaneously. So we have to be careful. If we want this energy transition to succeed, we have to be careful. We have to manage the transition, because as someone and maybe this is odd to hear this from someone who's the head of an international energy organization, but I'm concerned that if the public starts to equate high energy prices and volatility that we see today with the energy transition or climate policies, we're in big trouble. At least in my home country in the United States, if you lose the public on something as existential as this, you lose them forever. You don't get them back. And progress on climate is just too critical to waste any opportunities. And so I think there's a lot of important roles for traditional producers and oil and gas companies.
Thank you, Joe. I think that a key point that you make that we always should remember is that the partnership between the private and public sector, especially when we're talking about energy and deployment of energy system at scale, is going to be key. Just to give you a number, on average, when we talk about infrastructure, energy infrastructure being deployed, 70% of the cost is covered by the private sector, and only 30% by the public one. So, Jill, if you forgive me, I'm going to change it because Joe provoked me a little with the blockchain part. I'm going to ask another question to Silvio, and then I'll get back to you. So, Silvio, the other day, we were talking about how blockchain, and this adds to what Joe was saying, how blockchain could really help with what we call energy for all. The possibility of using blockchain to basically provide energy even in areas where you don't have a centralized grid or authority. Can you tell us more about this and your vision on this?
Well, yes, here is another possibility. So you want to produce energy, you say develop a plant, it costed you $100 million to develop a plant. Now, what do you want to do? You want to recoup on your investment, you want to sell the plant. You know, there are very few players, financial players specialized on energy, who can snatch it from your hand at the price tag of $100 million plus your profit a lot. And so when there are very few people, you know, they don't compete very hard for the business. They like each other. And so they are going to say, you know, I'll make you a good offer. You're $100 million plus another $1,000 for profit. What do you do? So you have a very limited number of buyers. You are pretty much stuck. But with blockchain, you can represent, say, your $100 million cost plant into, say, 1 million or 100 million even tokens that you can sell each one for $1. So suddenly, you open up, you are not hostage of a few specialized financial big whales specialized in energy. You can allow me, the person in the street, this lady in Paris, this guy in Sri Lanka, to buy $10 worth of your piece of your tokenized plant. That changes completely the thing. And as long as you have connected to the grid, you can actually sell it. That is actually pretty good deal. And if you say, in addition, that you can sell it in a peer-to-peer way, then it's another big win. And you say, but how much is worth my plant? You know what you could do? You could do price discovery. How do you do price discovery in a financial economy? You do an auction. I don't really know how much what worth is, but the market will tell me. You do an auction. Well, traditional auctions, that to be very in the same room, very for a few number of players. The five of us would be happy to see how much you bid. I see what the bids are. Everybody realizes what's happening fair and square because we are in a small room and we are very few of us. But on a blockchain, you can allow millions of people to put the bids for a piece of the plant. And so when all bids are transparently, common knowledge placed, you realize what the price is at which the plant has been sold, and everybody realizes which fraction of the plant each one of us has bought. And you know, the more buyers, the more you realize the value of your plant. Because if the big guys says, you know, I don't want to bid because I want to squash this democratization of finance, there is enough of us on the planet to get all the 100% collectively of your plant. So that is really a game changer. And I really believe that a strong believer in the democratization of finance, and which is good for everybody. In particular, is also good for the producer, for the constructor of the plant, that now can recoup the investment in a very fair way. So I believe very much in tokenization. Tokenization means liquidity. Very hard to move a very costly asset. Very easy to move pieces, small pieces of assets, because every day somebody will buy some from you, and liquidity is good, tokenization is good, and everybody really gains. And again, every transaction, invest buying and selling, at the cost of a fraction of a cent, without intermediation, because you could do in a blockchain, I get your asset, say a piece of it, of a plant, if and only if I get your money. I don't have to go first with the money, or you don't have to go first and give me your asset. We do it simultaneously. That is a very big win in which peer-to-peer democratization of finance, sophisticated financial tools are available to everybody at a very democratic prices. It really allows growth and prosperity for all, if you ask me.
Thank you, Silvio. So, Gilles, this brings me back to you. Obviously, infrastructure is going to be key. As we said, today, no hydrogen infrastructure is deployed at scale. As you mentioned, we will need to determine in which way we're going to ship hydrogen. Hydrogen by weight has a very high energy density. By volume, it's quite low. So, and to liquefy it, you need to really use lower temperatures than natural gas, liquefied natural gas. So, can you, which you were mentioning before, can you give us some example what the European Investment Bank is looking, what kind of project is looking at, and with which partners?
Of course. As I said, I think we are trying to invest in the production of green hydrogen, and as I said also, the most efficient way to do is to be close to the production side if we want to avoid transportation issue. So this year, for example, we worked together with Iberdrola in Spain, and we have developed a nice project where we've got a PV plant that is producing 100 megawatt peak, close to a battery storage system, and with embedded to that an electrolyzer close to the industrial site producing fertilizer. And this is a very efficient way to produce locally energy, have the battery system that enables to smooth down, in fact, if you want the intermittence of the PV panel production, and then to be able to deliver the green hydrogen on site without transportation, and with only a few storage that is necessary, of course, for industrial purposes. This is typically a project that is very efficient and that we think is of great importance. But the other thing is to try to have an impact on the hard-to-abate sector. And I talked already about the steel industry. Steel industry, you know, when you are a steel producer, you make investments for the next 30 years because it's a very long-term asset. And now they have to change the way the blast furnaces are working, right? And you have the ability to use hydrogen as a reductor to transform iron ore into iron. And precisely this year, we have approved and signed a project related to a steel production site in Sweden. It's a big project. It's a 4.3 billion euro project. So you see, it's a long-term investment to produce green steel. And it's embedding the production of hydrogen locally with an electrolyzer, but also a system using hydrogen direct reduction instead of the blast furnace. So this is typically what we need to do. On one side, to try to produce locally when it's possible to change, you know, the habit of using gray hydrogen and use rather green hydrogen. And on the other side, to try to organize the green transition of hard-to-abate sectors. So these are, if you want, the two main fields where we need to act. We have also supported the hydrogen for the transportation sector, because it's also something that is important for buses, you know, public transportation, because in a certain way, you know, there is an additional cost linked to the use of green hydrogen or hydrogen in general, and the public authorities, they can afford to take these costs on board for public transportation. So it's a way to try to generalize the use of green hydrogen for transportation. So we've worked, for example, in Denmark with providing a venture debt financing to the small company Everfuel. But we are also working on R&D processes with big companies like Faurecia, dealing with green hydrogen, the use of green hydrogen in mobility. So these are more or less, if you want, some interesting investments that we are supporting. And as I said, with this idea of, one, substituting the use of grey hydrogen locally for fertilizer, for example, or organizing the green transition of energy-intensive industries that will not be able to use electrification in their green transition.
Thank you, Gilles. There is no doubt that the adoption of hydrogen at scale is going to affect the energy system and energy value chains as we've known. So some of the points that Gilles made are key. Are we going to move hard-to-abate sectors? Just so that you have an idea, if we think just about steel production, ammonia production and methanol production, these alone today basically equate to about 43% of global hydrogen demand, which is today 75 million tons per year. All of this, basically 99.9% produced from fossil fuels, so not green. So it's going to be key, and it's going to change a lot of the energy value chain that we have today, and is going to be key to address the point that Gilles mentioned. Are we going to move this production close to where we're going to produce hydrogen, or are we going to ship the hydrogen to where the industries are today? So, Rim, let me conclude with you. We discussed how Morocco could become a key exporter to the European Union, up to 40% if shipping is done by ammonia. Obviously, how this hydrogen is met by the European Union has an impact on where the investments are going to be made, where jobs are going to be created. So what kind of partnership is Morocco looking at when we think about hydrogen with the European Union?
Thank you very much. So yeah, Basically, in its green hydrogen roadmap, Morocco assessed potential domestic demand as well as international market that it can capture. And adding to the study that you mentioned, a recent study also published by the Fraunhofer Society titled Study of the Opportunity of the Power to X.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm from Harvard. I have to
Yeah.
mention our study.
I know. So based on this study as well, since Morocco referred to it in its roadmap, that's why I'm citing it. So based on this study as well, Morocco may capture up to 4% of international market by 2030. So even though parts, as you mentioned, parts of the hydrogen production is meant to be produced or used in the fertilizer industry, Morocco's strategy is mainly export-oriented. So according to the roadmap, export could account up to 70% of the demand for Moroccan hydrogen. And in this sense, Morocco has been multiplying agreements and partnerships with many countries, particularly from Europe, namely Germany and Portugal, and mainly to or working on developing pilot projects, R&D development, innovations, etc. So it is still too early to perhaps present a more official framework for partnerships, but these are still under discussion. However, what Morocco should keep in mind is that many of these countries, mainly in Europe, that are looking into Morocco are also looking into other countries of the Mediterranean for green hydrogen. So Morocco needs to be very careful about the setting up or should consider all aspects of its strategy. Now, by product, it is assumed that about 75% of exported green hydrogen will be exported in the form of green ammonia and about 25% in the form of synthetic liquid fuels. Now, as I said earlier, and I think it is very important to emphasize this point in order to have a competitive offer to Europe, Morocco needs to continuously ensure its national competitiveness in areas such as regulatory, technical, financial, and managerial, just to name a few. And fundamentally, Morocco's green hydrogen ambition highlights the need for additional renewable energy, as I said before, industrial electrolyzers, desalination plants, given the water scarcity in the region, as well as processing plants capacity. So we talked extensively about the high cost of green hydrogen, and this is owing more to the high cost of the electrolysis process than to the high cost of green electricity, which we have seen its levelized cost of energy decreasing in recent years. Also, so this means that in the short terms, incentives might be needed for the electrolysis, transport, storage use, as well as manufacturing. Additionally, another important point for Morocco is that, considering water scarcity in the region, the green hydrogen will depend mainly on desalination plants, and this should not interfere with municipal water needs. Therefore, it will generate constraints regarding the location of the green hydrogen production sites, which will need to be close to the seaside. And this is advantageous for Morocco, given its shoreline that expands over 3,500 kilometers, given its proximity to end markets such as Europe, and also given its significant maritime exports. But despite that, as was mentioned by my fellow speaker, significant investments will be needed, particularly to build the adequate infrastructure. So we saw yesterday that repurposing the natural gas pipelines might not be as straightforward as it seems, given the characteristics of the molecules of hydrogen that are difficult than that of natural gas. So we have to keep in mind when considering or when building this infrastructure. Finally, given that the production and transport of green hydrogen should become environmentally sustainable, it is important for Morocco to ensure the traceability of the green hydrogen value chain from production to final disposal, which, and this process, as you mentioned before, involves different types of rules of origins, hence the need to implement certifications of guarantees that complies with the regulations of and standards of importing countries like Europe.
Thank you. So let me conclude with 3 points before thanking the panelists. As we've heard, hydrogen could indeed accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy, but innovation will be key, including blockchain. Second point, the key challenges are going to be cost and infrastructure deployment. And finally, public-private partnership are going to be key to make the process efficient. And with this, please join me to thank all the panelists.
Joe, thanks a lot. You made a very difficult point,